Yes, let's do it. Let's go for it. Let's jump off the cliff and see what happens. Did the pros outweigh the cons? I would say no. That's good. So refreshing. Hello everybody. So today's video is going to be a bit of a story time. So grab a iced tea, grab a coffee, water. This is going to be a fun one. I moved to New York almost 4 years ago with no money, completely broke, with no friends, completely alone. And this is the story on what decisions I made in order to move to New York, what happened once I got here, and what are the long-term effects of the decisions that I made, and the pros and cons of just living in the city. And at the end, I'll talk about if it was all worth it. So if you're thinking of moving to New York City or you're curious about the experience, learn from my mistakes. It was a doozy. So let's rewind to 2016. That's like me trying to rewind. Okay. I'll put this down. So it's January 2016 and I had bought a one-way ticket to Europe to do some traveling. I went on my travels. That's a whole nother video in itself, which I can make for you. I probably will make for you, but we're just gonna like gloss over that whole time. So that was January 2016 until October 2016. At the end of my travels, when I was running out of money, my visa was expiring. I had to make a decision and I either had to fork over a ton of money to get a visa to stay longer, or I had to decide to move home to Oregon to live with my mom, or I just had to pick another place to live. My pride was just too high to move back home at the time. I already had a ticket booked home in October 2016 to Oregon before I decided my next steps. So either way, I had to go home because one, I wanted to see my family, and two, all my stuff was at my mom's house. So either way, I had to go back and pick up the rest of it to move. I went home and that ticket was free because I had air miles. I charged a one-way ticket to New York City from Oregon in October 2016. In my time like researching New York City, I mean, I don't really remember why I chose New York City other than the reason that I just always wanted to live here. I know when I was 15, 16, I had a dream of being on Broadway and living in the big city, and I was from a small town, so that sounded amazing, and New York seemed like the place to be. I hadn't researched any other places to live, but New York was the place, and if you can make it here, then you can make it anywhere. So being the theater kid that I was like, New York is the place, and so I kind of had to fulfill that dream at some point, so I might as well do it while I'm young in my 20s. So I reached out to some of my friends. I think I had like 4 or 5 friends in New York City at the time from college, and they had made the leap and moved from Seattle to New York. So I reached out to them even though I hadn't seen them in like a couple of years maybe. They were all so wonderful, but at the same time they were like, yo, it's not a fun place to live. Run for your life, but like if you want to do it, like do it. You do you, but like I'm warning you. So I just took that as like, oh, it's gonna be a challenge and I'll make it anyway. And I was so far deep into like the YOLO mentality. Even though I don't have the money, I can make it work. This wasn't thought out well at all. I just was like, yes, let's do it. Let's go for it. Let's jump off the cliff and see what happens. That's really how it felt though. So I basically only had the money to buy that plane ticket to New York. I was like, how am I gonna afford to stay in the city once I'm there? So I contacted my friends again who live in New York, and a couple of them had agreed to let me stay on their couch while I could find a place to live and while I could find a job. I wasn't looking for any type of corporate job. Remember, I had a theater degree. I didn't have any corporate experience, nor did I even consider that as an option. Before I go further into that, I also want to say, like, you know who you are if you let me stay on your couch in 2016. I will never forget that. I thank you for that, and I wouldn't have gotten through this without you. Once I found a couple couches to stay on, I felt a little bit better about moving, and it felt a little less scary to like transplant myself into another city. I packed up my traveling backpack. It was kind of bigger, so it could fit a bit of stuff, and I packed up a suitcase. So I really only packed what was necessary. I think I had like 2 pairs of shoes, 3 pairs of pants, 4 shirts, my journals and some books, and like only what was necessary. And I was on my way to New York. It's really hot in here. On the flight to New York. I got the cheapest flight, obviously. I ended up having to stay overnight in Minneapolis airport. So I land in JFK and I have no idea really where I'm going. I know I have to get to Washington Heights where my friend is letting me stay with them. And I ended up taking an A train to Long Island Railroad to like the C or the E. I was totally lost. I spent like $30, I think, trying to get to where I was staying because I just had no idea. I did not plan ahead. I like would have to plan everything now. Like I can be YOLO. I can be like, yeah, spontaneous. If I plan it, is that weird? Like I can do really crazy things as long as I plan for it. That seems kind of backwards, but that's just how I am. Within 5 or 6 days, I had landed a job, and within 3 weeks, I had got an apartment. Well, I got a room in an apartment in Bushwick, Brooklyn. I mean, it's a bit far out, but my rent wasn't that bad. I think I paid like $810 for a room, and it was pretty nice. And actually my roommates were really cool. That was really lucky. And the restaurant job that I had was in Chelsea. Go figure, the amount of times I've heard, oh, you're Chelsea, working in Chelsea. That was super annoying. I wasn't making any money. I'm just gonna be super transparent here. There is lots of money to be made in serving, but it wasn't where I was working. That restaurant in Chelsea was the worst restaurant experience. I had to be there at 5:30 in the morning. Yeah, I would wake up at 3:30 every morning that I was working to go to work breakfast. It was just a nightmare. But it was actually that job where I met one of my best friends, who is still one of my best friends to this day. We clicked immediately because of her. I got into a fancier restaurant. Her roommate ended up giving me a reference into working for a really fancy restaurant. And that restaurant is where I met my main circle of friends for the next couple of years. I'm still close with today as well. Fantastic people, and I owe it all to my friend from that restaurant in Chelsea. She hooked it up for me. Then we're into 2017. So far things are like going pretty well. I had gotten a little bit lucky getting a room. I had landed a job that I kept for a while. I met some new friends. Like I didn't feel so alone, but I was struggling financially. And I know that a way for me to like make friends was to go out a lot. Like I didn't know anybody, so if I just sat at home by myself, I obviously wasn't going to be making any friends. So I would go out to bars and just meet people and go out with my friends from work, but that all costs a lot of money, especially like when we're done drinking at 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning and then have to take a car home. So I was not in a good financial position. And I remember getting a call, I think it was like March 2017, in the middle of my dinner shift. So this is like 7:30 or 8 o'clock, right at the pop. The host comes up to me and is like, you have a really important phone call on the line. I had a big section in the restaurant. I was in the weeds, and then I had to go take this emergency phone call that my apartment got robbed. Oh my God. I remember just how many mental breakdowns I had from that point. I can't even count. Okay, I think it was like 3. But I remember getting home and there were police in my apartment, and we were just trying to figure out and piece together what happened. But they stole jewelry, they stole my laptop, my iPad, which is what I was living on, and I had an iPhone 4 at the time. We ended up having to move out really fast. There I lost my deposit. I lost my last month's rent because the landlord was the one that really screwed us over in the end. Super long story. I couldn't afford to pay like last month's rent or even a hefty deposit after that. Not only had I lost the deposits and stuff, I had lost all that money I had spent on my electronics. I'm like heavy breathing as I'm telling this story because it was just such a stressful time. But I found a 1-month sublet pretty close, so I moved to Crown Heights, and that's where I stayed for 1 month. And then after that sublet ended, I wasn't able to renew it. I moved to Chelsea, which was a sublet for like 2 or 3 months. I moved 8 times since I moved to New York. I lived in Bushwick, I lived in Crown Heights, I lived in Chelsea, I lived in Inwood, and I lived in Washington Heights after that. And then I moved to Lower East Side. Despite the amount of cockroaches in my apartment, it was actually like an amazing location, so I was able to walk everywhere. I didn't have to pay for a Metro card. That was awesome. But I lived in a tiny closet. I'll insert some pictures so you can see. It was so small, and I paid $1,200 for it. So I moved out of there after 6 months. All of these are sublets because I still couldn't save enough money to have a deposit. My credit was terrible because I wasn't able to pay off my credit card, which I was using to spend a lot of money when I first moved to New York. So I was not able to save anything. So I'll take a tea break. So yeah, I love the Lower East Side. Then from there, I moved to East Williamsburg. From there, I ended up with my best friend I met at that job in Chelsea when I first moved. She has had my back. She helped me move, I think at least 3 or 4 of the times. She helped me do an emergency move out of East Williamsburg, put all my stuff in a storage unit, and then I stayed with her for 2 weeks in East Harlem. I had this like span of time where I had nowhere to go. She helped me do that, and I have been here ever since. So I moved into this room April 2019. So I've been here for a solid amount of time. I knew when I got here that I loved the place and that I didn't want to move because I was so tired of moving. And now I feel like I'm finally able to get back on my feet. But you can see that the financial decisions I made at the beginning of my trip, not thinking ahead for my finances, really was a ripple effect on at least like the first 2 or 3 years that I lived here, because I could not get out of debt. Mind you, I also had student loans that I couldn't pay. I had to figure out my health insurance. I just had no clue what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to be in the city. I did threaten to leave a few times. I've had a mental breakdown, I think, in like Washington Square Park, Union Square, in Inwood, in that beautiful like Tryon Creek Park. Boy, was it a doozy. Since then, I stopped going out so much, and that's really been the way I've been able to save money. I was spending way too much money on eating out and going out when I know I couldn't afford it. I have been able to save money since then, even during this pandemic, to get myself on my feet. I was able to pay off that credit card. I also have had like 5 or 6 jobs as well. There was one point where I'm like, I cannot learn another menu. My brain is so full of similar dishes, and to remember like which restaurant is which, I was losing my mind. So that's a bit of my like really rocky start to living in New York. But now we're gonna reflect a little bit, and I'm gonna go through some pros and cons. After all this time, what I really think of living here. We'll start with some pros, since that story time was a bit depressing. The first pro that I have about living in New York City is that it is a place for opportunity if you have no idea what you want to pursue. At any point, if you wanted to switch your career or to like dip your feet in another field to do an internship or something, you can make a decision and 30 seconds later have an opportunity at your feet that is close to your home. The next pro is the pizza. I'm drooling just thinking about it. New York pizza is so thin, and you have to like fold it up and eat it kind of like a taco. If you go into Brooklyn at the smaller mom and pop places, their pizza is the best, and it's the cheapest. Another pro is the scenery. If you watched my New York City vlog, I went to Brooklyn Bridge Park. I just took videos of the New York skyline from Brooklyn. There are also excellent views from New Jersey. There's also excellent views from up the Empire State Building, or any building. Those views are like what makes me feel alive in the city, which leads me to my next pro, which is that like grind that everyone has when they're here. The energy is palatable. The energy is palatable. Okay, we'll say you can taste the energy of the city. Another pro is that people automatically think you're cool for living here and for like being able to survive here. Survive is like the best word I can think of to describe it, because you may not be able to like live sustainably here, but if you're surviving, you gotta get some kudos for doing that. And I'm honestly not living here for those kudos. It was just something I realized and some feedback I got. People have noticed that I had been struggling, but they're like, wow, you're pushing through. Oh my God, New York City is so cool to live in. I'm like, oh, you have no idea how hard it is to live here. Another pro is the springtime here is beautiful, and frankly I love the summer as well. It does get super humid, but the moment that I got an air conditioner, I was like, I love summer in New York. The beaches are kind of dirty and gross, and like don't swim in the Atlantic Ocean, at least from New York, because it's just disgusting. And the city has a buzz. It really does in the summertime. All the rich people have left to the Hamptons and it's a lot of tourists coming in. There's just a really special vibe that's different from a lot of other times. Another pro is a lot of people's cons, I think. The rats are freaking funny. Like, the rats are funny. I've seen a rat carry a piece of pizza just down the subway, like weaving through people. They are big, they are strong, they have been living in New York longer than anybody, and if you can just kind of have a sense of humor about it, they are hilarious creatures. We will never get rid of them, just like we will never get rid of the roaches, which is a huge con in itself. The bugs. Roaches are disgusting. Water bugs are even grosser, because I couldn't squish them because of that sound that they would make when they get squished. Ugh. So that's gonna lead me into my cons list. One con of living in New York City is I think I had too much coffee. My heart's beating. So one of the big cons of living in New York City is that white people, like myself, have turned a beautiful city full of culture and diversity into white people land. We have ruined and gentrified so many neighborhoods. I realize that I'm a part of that problem. These like tried and true New Yorkers can't afford to live in their own city that they have been living in their whole life, and that's really, really sad. How we fix that problem, I don't know. You can see that a lot of these people who moved to New York City just for like the vlogs and the pictures, the pretty brunches and stuff, you can see that they were the first ones to leave once this pandemic hit. An obvious con is that everything is just really expensive, and I've touched on that this whole video. Like a cocktail at one of my restaurants is $18 to $20. Rent prices are astronomical, which leads to another point, is that taxes are insane. I have been reamed by taxes every year that I've been here. Another con is that, wow, it's great that we have the subway system so that we can get around to different parts of the city. It's great, it's accessible pretty much anywhere you live in Brooklyn and Staten Island and the Bronx and Queens and Manhattan. Like, it's accessible everywhere you go. There's gonna be a subway within a 10 to 20 minute walk at like maximum. So that's great, but it's only great if it freaking works. I get so frustrated with the MTA. And it's just so expensive anyways. Like a weekly pass is $33 now or something, and people pay that because that's the way to get around it. It's obviously cheaper than paying for a car and for gas and for insurance and parking, so people pay it. It could take 10 minutes to get into the city, it could take an hour to get into the city, so you have no idea when you're on your way to work like how much time it's going to take. So yeah, I hate that. Follow MTA on Twitter because people are doing live updates per subway line, so if it's ever delayed or whatnot, you can just look up like A train Twitter delays and they'll actually be explaining what's going on. So we're like at the end of the video, but I'm gonna cap it off with some questions just to like pull this whole experience together. Do I regret moving here? No, not at all. I have met some of the best people I've ever met in my life, and how could I regret that? I do regret how I moved here though. Those actions at the beginning was a ripple effect for the next couple years. Just to be clear, I don't recommend moving to New York City with no money. However, I can vouch for moving to New York City alone because it gives you the opportunity to meet all these new people. And if you really want to start over, this is a good place to do it. Did the pros outweigh the cons? I would say no. The magic of this city kind of gets muted once you get jaded about the subways being late all the time, about how much the city smells when it's summer, like the tourists are annoying and stop in the middle of the sidewalk. Like, it's really hard to let those not get to you. If you can't keep that excitement and that true love for like the city itself, then there's really no point to you to live here. If you have any questions about moving here or living here or neighborhoods that you're curious about, please let me know. And if you live in New York, are you having a similar experience to me? Do you agree with things I said, or do you disagree with things I said? Give me a big thumbs up if you liked it. If you're flirting with the idea of subscribing to me, just do it. Just press subscribe. Just ring that little bell. You might as well just like commit to it. I upload a video every Tuesday and Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Oh, it's so hot. I gotta turn on the AC. Holy crap.